when they hit the record button on Zoom or YouTube or whatever it is, that box pops up that says, "Would you like to leave the meeting?" And I'm always tempted to say yes. I think that would be okay. I am going to endeavor to talk about bodhicitta a little bit more. I don't know why I keep coming back to a topic that's so difficult, but I thought I would try to pull out some very concrete examples, something that's very definite and applicable to our practice. So I actually tried to go through some of our daily chants and see where we are openly acknowledging what I would call relative bodhicitta, the intention to make others' lives less painful. I made a little list. The first thing we recite when we start our day is a protection supplication. And we have 4 protection supplications, but one of them ends, may they heal everyone who is unhappy, sick, or suffering, and fill them with light. May they be happy, healthy, free from suffering, and full of light. One of the next chants we do is the 4 bodhisattva vows. And the first of the 4 bodhisattva vows are, beings are without limit, or beings are numberless, may I liberate them all. 6 days a week, we recite the Metta Sutta, the Buddha's teachings on loving kindness. And it says something along the lines of, may all beings be happy and at their ease. May they be joyous and free of safety. May all beings, omitting none, all beings omitting none, small or great, visible or invisible, near or far away, born or to be born, may they all be happy and at their ease. A number of you have received jukai or sewing raksus, or at least have informally recited refuge vows. But the first of the 3 pure precepts is very simply, don't do good. Do good, don't do harm. Be kind, don't cause trouble. And then these 2 texts I've been talking about a little bit lately, Shanti Deva's Bodhicharyavatara. One of the famous lines from there is, may I be a servant to anyone who needs a servant. And it becomes much more elaborate than that. May everyone receive praise while I receive all the blame. And Togme in the 37 practices of a bodhisattva, famously, Sokuzan quotes this often: if it's better for me to be sick, let me be sick. If it's better for me to die, let me die. If it's better for me to be healthy, let me be healthy. But if any state or condition that I can be in can be of benefit to others, may I take on that state. And bodhicitta, to me, is intimately connected with the bodhisattva, the one who vows to liberate all beings. But in a sense, bodhicitta to me points at more of that active quality, particularly when we talk about relative bodhicitta, endeavoring to just cultivate some sort of warmth, somehow connecting with just the basic decency, the basic humanity, the inherent respect that each one of us is born into. And I had a really great example this week, because sometimes I think it gets bogged down in concepts. We think that kindness needs a concept to validate it, that there needs to be some sort of teaching that says why we should be kind or how we should be kind, instead of just the simplicity of interacting. And I've been raving about this meal I had yesterday in Dearborn. I drove Sanho to Dearborn. He had a conference for the International Federation of the Blind. And Dearborn has the largest population of Middle Eastern and Muslims outside of the Middle East. And so there's a tremendous amount of food. And so I found this restaurant called Sahara. And there's no better word to describe it than the people in there were kind. And there was no pretense around it. It was just friendliness. And it felt good. It made me want to return to just give them my money and fill my stomach, but have somebody that with no obligations you can just be kind to. And so I don't have a lot that I can say as far as activity, because we can't prescribe activity. Prescribed activities often become stale. They're repetitive, they can be insincere in the sense that we're trying so hard to do the activity that we miss the situation. But we can endeavor to train our mind so that we aren't leading with any presumption of how we should function. If we're validating why we should do something or shouldn't do something, if we should hold back or if we should move forward, any of that type of validation really overwhelms us. It really takes over the situation, so that just simple interacting, that simple acknowledgement, and that may be a good word, to just acknowledge the person in front of you, to just take a moment to actually see a human being in front of you. It can be hard, but it doesn't need a complicated concept behind it. It doesn't need a lot of validation. So when Sokuzan talks about flashing, I think about flashing on the vow. He talks about flashing on the senses, which for me has been helpful to just flash on. I often do the sense of sound or sense of touch. But even before walking into work, not maintaining, but to just flash on that intention. May all beings be happy and at their ease. May they be joyous and live in safety. Beings are numberless. May I liberate them all. May everyone be happy, healthy, and filled with light. And then don't maintain it. Don't try to act out of some artificial attitude, but to just reconnect with our inspiration to see somebody in front of us and relate to them. Now, with all of that being said, there still does need to be a foundational awareness where we're practicing. It's probably not going to show up too strongly if we just go through it conceptually, but to see intimately for ourselves, where do we get caught? What is the self-deception that is occurring? And that seated meditation begins to inform our activity, but not conceptually necessarily. That our practice actually begins to permeate our life without us even knowing. And it just begins to seep out. So that's why we don't have to prescribe action. And that's of the 5 houses of Zen, Chiezan said to his student, I don't tell you how to act, just see clearly. So even back then, he's not telling his student, do this, do this, do this. He's saying, just see clearly. And so that's what I said on Wednesday, and Unyo asked about to me the first kindness. One of the first kindnesses, we extend ourselves to the world, but we do so in seated meditation. And so we have the relative bodhicitta. We have this relative aspiration for beings to be happy, to be at their ease, to be free of suffering. And then we have this quality of take that back, erase, rewind. Then to acknowledge ultimate bodhicitta, because it is not a quality. It is not something we will recognize. It's not something we need to go looking for. But in studying it, we can begin to consider that there is something that can arise, some inspiration, some well of energy that is not defined by anything in particular. The example we may be most familiar with is Sokuzan's energy around teaching, especially if you're around him in person. He may be absolutely unwell, physically unwell, and then he teaches and it's overwhelming. There's no hesitation. And then he leaves the town and he may collapse down into the hojo, not literally, but figuratively. Or the example I give, which is a little funnier, was when I was going into prisons with Sokuzan and Unyo when I was still in college. And they're really long days. It's just exhausting to go into a prison. It just drains you. And so we were leaving Muskegon facilities, driving back. They were dropping me off at Grand Rapids, and Sokuzan would fall asleep instantly, just instantly. And I would ask a Dharma question, and it's like he could hear me in his sleep. He would respond no. I've been asked questions, and you can tell by my response, I don't want you to keep bothering me. So I just kind of like, yeah, do whatever you want. Shoto's been getting a lot of those lately because I've been just so tired. But Sokuzan like answers, is there more questions? Anything else? Anything else? And I say, no, I don't think so. And then asleep. But 10 minutes later, if I have another question, there's the energy, then it's gone. So that's not ultimate bodhicitta in the way that we perceive it, but there's some energy there that has nothing to do with how Sokuzan feels about the situation. It is the Dharma. It is the vow. And I wanted to tie it back into something very concrete and definite as far as the order of immediate light. So we have relative bodhicitta, our aspiration to be kind, our aspiration to provide some relief to those around us. And we have ultimate bodhicitta, something we endeavor to understand intimately through our practice and through the path. And the union of these two, I feel, is summed up really perfectly and succinctly in the first tenet of the order of immediate light. Consciousness always finds its own form. You can't find or define consciousness, and yet it is present in every relative expression. So consciousness, ultimate bodhicitta, is always finding its own form, relative bodhicitta. That when we begin to see for ourselves, see our self-deception, we begin to take our hands away from meddling, from interfering, from producing. Consciousness has the ability to express itself. It is not interfered with through grasping, through rejecting, through ignorance. So the order of immediate light, to me, in a sense, through these tenets, acknowledge that perfect union, the coming together, the perfect expression of ultimate and relative, that we don't have to, one is not seen at the expense of the other. The second tenet says the same thing. It is empty as it appears and full as it is. So we can't grasp onto the form. We can't just grasp onto the relative bodhicitta or the relative slogans and say, well, I'm executing these relative expressions of bodhicitta. I'm doing them because it's empty as it appears, and yet it's full as it is. So if we see it, we recognize, you could say in a sense, that it is a vehicle or an expression of consciousness. It is a vehicle or an expression of ultimate bodhicitta. And I feel that some of the timeliness of this for me is, as I was saying, to be a little bit personal, just kind of being worn down and just feeling I don't actually really want to help. I don't particularly want to extend any more energy. Please stop calling me at 9 o'clock at night. And yet on a daily basis, I'm reciting these words. We're reciting these words that we don't reflect on anymore. If you think about those four immeasurables, I didn't bring up the four immeasurables. Unyo's chant. May all beings be happy in that, may all beings enjoy happiness and the root of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the root of suffering. The reason that one's so hard is that's what we say before we eat. And anything that's in the way of us eating, we get through as quickly as possible. So that one just rattles out. It just comes out so quickly that when you slow down, you can't think of it. And talk to Sokuzan about this one. There's a long refuge formula that he taught me many years ago that I try to do daily. And you get so used to saying it, you say it so quickly that if you try to say it slowly, I can't. I lose it and then it falls apart. And I tried to do it on Wednesday, reciting the end, which is the part about bodhicitta, just as the Sugatas of former times realized bodhicitta. And I got all jumbled because it was going too slow. I think I just made up an ending to it.
You did.
I did. Yeah. So that's why sometimes Sokuzan recommends slowing down. Just as the Sugatas of former times realized bodhicitta and established themselves by stages in the training of a bodhisattva, just so for the benefit of beings, and that's where I lost it, just so for the benefit of beings, I will train progressively in those disciplines. I missed a part.
Right.
I will, yeah. Yes. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm usually not able to help anybody.
Yeah, it's a very long formula. It's at least half a page typed out in 12-point font. But coming back to that initial inspiration to give this talk, I just wanted to touch base on it because I feel that maybe it takes time to think about, maybe it takes time to consider.
I just said it wrong.
I know, yeah, but I can't remember the right way.
Me.
I will rouse bodhicitta and likewise train progressively in those disciplines.
Yeah. And then there's more after that.
Yeah. So if we can be kind to others, and I talked to Shoto about this, it's like for some of us before we started practicing Buddhism, it was very clear what kindness was, and somehow we've made it complicated through practice. But if I were to go and ask Rumi about being kind at school, it's not artificial. It's very simple. It's like he brings me a cookie or lets me play with his favorite toy. Sometimes I've got to twist his arm on that one. And to also be kind to others that are doing it differently. Please, there's no standard to live up to. We don't need company on our path in the sense of everyone having consensus, everyone functioning the same way. You could say as a bodhisattva that we are the singular being that is responsible for the world. And it doesn't matter what the rest of your sangha is doing. It doesn't matter what the rest of the world is doing. And I'm just saying that as a way of talking about it. I'm not saying that's literally the case, but it's an attitude that you could consider that while we're evaluating the practice of others, while we're evaluating where they're at with their mind and with their suffering, that your ability to function is not inhibited by the confusion of somebody else. I think Hui Nung said something like that. One of the Zen teachers said that my understanding can't penetrate your confusion, and your confusion can't obscure my wisdom. And there's something quite profound to that, but on the path, that's very painful. It's very difficult to see that kind of willingness to be with the world, regardless of how it plays into our ideas of the path and our practice. So if you could help me, if there are questions, I feel like this is an area that's worth continuing to look at. Mozuku.
Mozuku bowing, I think you said through the practice, we complicate what it means to be kind.
We can, yes.
In what way do we do that, or what would cause us to complicate it?
I think there's some sort of fear that may be a part of that. But we get into this mentality of compartmentalizing our lives. And so we need a concept to validate everything we do. And if we can't be kind without a concept, it's not kindness. It's a concept. It's imitation. So that's where the complication comes in, where it's not wrong. And I would ask you to be, any one of us, to be very soft with ourselves and be very soft with one another. But like one of the questions I've heard is, isn't that meddling? Isn't that meddling to be kind? And situationally, if it's very artificial, or if you're inserting yourself where you're not welcome, or you're prioritizing the kindness over the situation, yes. But in a sense, if you just go out and live your life, you see that there's no need to prescribe kindness. If you actually take a moment to acknowledge who's in front of you and acknowledge the situation, I feel that there's a natural warmth that is there. And I say that very tentatively because it may not feel that way. But just like when Sokuzan has us start an interview by sitting down and looking at one another, that's connecting to what we're talking about. There's something about that breaks through some of the concepts a little bit, where you have to actually look at a human being before you blame them for something. You have to look at a human being before you off-gas your negativity. And so that's what I'm saying, is that we don't need to justify or conceptualize kindness, and it doesn't have to be complicated, and it doesn't have to be premeditated, but it could just be flashing back onto that vow, that aspiration, that may everyone be happy and at their ease. And if there's something I can do to help with that, may I do that.
Well, so goodbye. One of the complications I conjure up about this is that being kind doesn't necessarily mean helping.
Yes.
So, what is the difference between kindness and helping?
Well, if we're talking about helping in the same way, it's if we're rooting it in the idea of a helper, where we actually obscure the situation through our identity. And the kind of kindness or the kind of help we can offer is usually more vulnerable. It doesn't have as much reassurance as we would like. We actually have to expose ourselves to a situation and then relate to the situation. So kindness is actually being able to begin to acknowledge what's in front of you outside of what you think about it. And I think out of that, we naturally can provide some help or some relief. But if we go into it by creating an identity of a saver, or creating an identity of a helper, or somebody who needs to insert themselves, where we actually have no respect for the other person, we don't actually consider, listen, receive, then it's more about us. And all of us do that to some extent. I do that. And the best we can do is begin to acknowledge when maybe we misunderstood the situation, can take responsibility. I apologize, I misunderstood that. I thought something else was the case. I see now that that's not the case. Intention is very important in this. I feel intention is primary in this. We can't look for results. We can't base it just on what do we get out of this. Shoto
bowing. In that area of sitting down in front of somebody to kind of penetrate the concept or something like that, I find that I can still not see a human in front of me, still like just so much distance. Is there any way to break through that?
Maybe sit longer
in front of the person?
You might try it. You might make that the entire interview. I don't know. I might talk to Chiezan about that. But that's something that the longer you look at somebody, the more it changes, the more uncomfortable it becomes. So that in and of itself gives you a lot to look at. So there's still tremendous, to me, relative value in that, because it gives you so much of a mirror to see our own fixation, our own resistance. It's an embarrassing area. It's really a humiliating area. And I can tell you, since she's on here listening with Rumi, but there was a time early on in our relationship where if I got my feelings hurt, which is very easy to hurt my feelings, and it's really hard to believe that Senchu could hurt my feelings because she's doesn't do anything hurtful. But if I got my feelings hurt, I would just be like, I'm not going to say anything until she says something. I'm just going to ignore her and not say anything. It's like this rigidness. It's so painful, and yet we relish in the pride of being right. So that's where we might actually say, do it anyway. Extend yourself a little bit, especially in those intimate relationships, those personal relationships. But I also can say I worked very closely with Chiezan to try to understand what it was to be in a healthy relationship, what that was, and that did not come quickly or easily for me. Luckily, I had a very patient partner.
Bowing. Thank you. I resonate with that kind of rigid being right situation.
Yeah.
And can that relationship lose its grip even if it's still convincing us?
I'm not sure what you're saying. I'm not sure what you're asking.
can there be some space or softness in that area if it still relatively looks like we're right?
Yes. Yes, there can be. Thank you. And you,
Then you're bowing. The last part of that long mantra, not mantra,
the refuge.
refuge
Mhm.
was something like arousing bodhicitta.
Yes.
What is it to arouse bodhicitta?
I'll give you a very classical definition. I'm not saying that this is how you do it. For us, our inspiration, our understanding is really strongly connected with our sitting practice. I feel like that includes everything. It gives you a chance to look at everything and working with the teacher in tandem. The most classical example, though, with arousing bodhicitta, these 7 points of mind training by Atisha. This is progressive. You start with first practice the groundwork, guru yoga, and then you move and you look at the ultimate and relative bodhicitta slogans, and you would practice Tonglen, and something Sokuzan doesn't teach publicly or widely, but individually may teach. And my understanding of that practice is you have to first start with some sort of connection to a tenderness within yourself. And so the classical example being the mother, you connect with some sort of tenderness of safety and love and compassion, and you endeavor to grow that feeling and extend it to others while simultaneously taking on the entire negativity of the world. All of the blame, all of the jealousy, all of the greed, all of the anger, all of the hatred, and you give up everything. You give up everything, you extend it outward. So that would be the classical way in which relative bodhicitta would be aroused. But as I said earlier, and this is something that shows up in Jamgang Kongtrul's translation, or not translation, his commentary on these 7 points, is that it has to be on a foundation of meditation practice, because that's what begins to cut through the conceptual qualities of it. And one of the slogans, one of the ultimate bodhicitta slogans is liberate even the antidote. So even the teachings have to be liberated. Even the concepts of ultimate bodhicitta have to be liberated. You can't find any little nook or cranny that you grasp onto as, well, this is my little nugget of conceptual truth that I can hold on to or cling to. So it all has to be self-liberated. So the arousing of bodhicitta starts out with that very natural sense of warmth we may have towards somebody, and then endeavoring to begin to grow that so that we really, at least conceptually, begin to prioritize the well-being of others. It has to be done intelligently, and it has to be done, and when I say has to be done, it seems important to do with a teacher. That this isn't just a practice you would casually take upon yourself. And Trungpa Rinpoche actually kept this teaching from his students for quite some time. It was something he did not teach until students had been practicing for some time, as I understand through reading the introduction from Training the Mind. And it wasn't until much later that it was more publicly taught. Thank you. Are there any questions online? Go ahead, Jishin.
Jishin bowing. Chiezan, I would like, first of all, say that I'm extremely grateful for you teaching that whole, I don't want to call it concept, but I will call it, I don't know another word. I think that this is something which I felt a little bit lacking in the sense of wider teachings about bodhicitta. And I really appreciate the fact that you stepped into it and with such an openness and invitation towards us to explore it. So first of all, thank you for it. I have a question, and this topic is quite close to my heart. So this is why I'm so grateful. But I'm wondering whether, if I can call it practicing bodhicitta and connecting with that ultimate bodhicitta, whether just doing first this with myself is perhaps something which is I don't know, safer practice in a way of recognizing it in myself when I'm in pain, when I suffer. So this is there's a question mark at the end, but maybe you can make it into the question. Bowing, thank you.
If you're talking about a formal practice, my very, very direct encouragement would be to do that in tandem. Right now, Sokuzan is your teacher, to receive that sort of instruction from him. And I think, especially when you ask him about stuff, like I asked him about talking about this. This is material he gave me years ago to look at. I was going through some particular difficulties, and he was completely in favor of it. He said, yes, please, if you have energy, teach it. And so I would say similarly, if there's some quality or aspect around this that feels inspiring, that you would talk with him. And it would not surprise me. I remember when Sokuzan was coming up with your names, as your public name, Jishin, I believe, is Compassion Heart or something along those lines. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
And so there's two hearts. There's the kanji character for Shin, is Ji for compassion. At the very bottom of that character is the heart character. The Shin is just the heart character. And I believe there's a third heart character in your private name. Is that also correct?
I'm not sure.
There is. Yeah, so it would not surprise me that Sokuzan, when he named you, that's something I remember we're both remarking on, is that of the 4 characters of your private and public name, 3 of them included the character for heart. So I would talk with him about any formality to that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions, particularly online, from anyone online? Go ahead, Yu-Hong. Oh, no, okay. You just turn your camera on. It's good to see you. Sokuran?
Sokuran bowing. You mentioned chitta in your previous discussion. I'm curious how chitta, as a translation of mind, how that form of mind consciousness plays into the arousal of bodhi. Bowing.
That's a very good question. And in a sense, I would say it is bodhi. That type of mind, chitta or shin, heart mind, just like in the shin ming, trust in the heart mind. There's something very intimate, and it goes beyond a feeling quality. So it's the awakening of that aspiration, and awakening of that inspiration. And I don't know why this sticks out. And this, again, is not a blanket teaching, but when Sokuzan says do it anyway, there's something for me personally that does not feel like a challenge. It doesn't mean it's not degrading. It's like reconnect, re-acknowledge why you're even on this path, to extend yourself to others. So chitta, the awakened chitta, the awakened mind, to me, it's just the awakening of that Buddha nature, that Tathagata Garbha. That's just one interpretation. I want to say that that's not necessarily something I drew from anywhere, but just in responding to your question, that's what shows up.
So, Sokuran bowing. Does the origin of bodhi somehow connect to that word? And if not, what is the origin?
Bodhi does not have an origin. It's not differentiated. It's not hiding. Although in the Tathagata Garbha Sutra, it's talked about that way. And I know you probably came across some of that in studying Queen Srimala. It's like a treasure underneath a poor man's house that he doesn't know about. There's all these images for this hidden quality. But I I think that's one way to talk about it, but to come back to the first tenet, consciousness always finds its own form. There's nothing that isn't awakened mind. But there's a tremendous amount of discrimination and prejudice that occurs that leads to us going to war with the very thing that's expressing itself to us. So what is the origin of Bodhi? I don't feel that you're going to be able to find a particular origin or a first cause, but whatever's showing itself in front of you, whatever is arising in front of you, is not separate. It's not other than Bodhi. It's not other than Bodhicitta. Thank you. Mozuku.
I was thinking about, or just the importance of being able to look at somebody in the eye and take a moment to acknowledge that they're a human being.
Yeah.
My question is really how to work with it when that's not possible, but I'm thinking about my work when it's very narrow amount of communication, doesn't have much
Mhm.
heart to it. It's very should, shouldn't, right, wrong, best, worst. And often not even a face to go with it.
Because you're working virtually primarily, yes.
Yeah, and it's even if I weren't, most
Mhm.
of the people I work with are all over the planet. There's just it just feels like being talked to by a bunch of machines all the time, and then I
Yeah.
see that there are humans, but I can't. How do you connect with a human being that isn't showing themselves as?
If you can connect to this human being, I don't know. I don't know how hard that is, to work in a virtual sphere where you don't really get to see anybody. It's probably very systematized. You're working in technology. So I would say maybe the kindness towards oneself, to give yourself some attention, to give those qualities of mind that are arising and falling some tension and some space to be there. And that's what brings us back to the cushion. Other than that, I know you're doing everything you can. I know you're working closely with Sokuzan around that. And I've said this before, there has to be some understanding that we don't have to be a martyr to our own suffering, that it's okay if there are ways where you can soften some of that. There's nothing wrong with doing something you enjoy to decompress. Sokuzan and I have been talking a lot about what we've been watching, probably more for my sake because it helps me to unwind. So I've been telling them about all the South Park episodes I've been watching lately, because that really completely unplugs my mind. There's nothing emotionally involving about South Park. And so that's something I can just sit there, or having my meal at Sahara the other day. Like there was just something, I was nobody. I was nobody. And it was just a wonderful feeling. So sometimes being able to take that time for oneself and return when we can to training the mind, but not to do it so much where we burn ourselves out, or if we're just completely amping ourselves up around it, to have some kindness towards oneself.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, one more in that area.
Please.
No, but I'm relating it to it this way. Is there a way to be kind or help in more than I can do the work you're asking me to do, but like actually help on a human level somehow, or be kind, either of those, when you don't know anything actually about a human being?
I don't know. I think that would have to show up situationally, especially if you're never meeting these people in person. It can be difficult. So I would say you could also start with the people you are seeing on a daily basis. You could start with your neighbors and your mom and your sangha and the people you're interacting with. I really like to go around and bug Karen over at Chow Bella, or go downtown and bug Marquita at Simply Sensational, and just engage, interact with people. So maybe start with the people that you are having to see on a daily basis. I really appreciate everyone's willingness to look at this material with me. As I said, I feel like it's worth looking at in the context of our strong sitting practice, and like to thank Sokuzan for encouraging me to talk about this. And I think we can close for the evening. But before we do, I would invite you to join us tomorrow for our monk training day. The senior monks will be giving talks starting at 10:30 tomorrow, and then again at 2:30. And they'll be talking about excerpts from Dogen Zenji's Shobogenzo and Eihei Koroku, and those have been really enjoyable talks. So please join us if you can. We'll stand and dedicate the mirror.
May merit this penetrate into all places, so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Jio San Chi Shri Song Sang the 10 directions, the 3 times, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna, Paramita. Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions and the 3 times, please hear us. Please come down out of the light and protect Sokokoji Buddhist Temple Monastery, its buildings, gardens, and all adjoining areas from any and all dark or negative energy. Remove and dissolve any negative energy or devices. Fill everything and everyone with light. Please shield and protect with light our teachers, monks, students, and all practitioners of the Dharma, our families and friends from negative forces and energy from now on. Help us to realize the truth of the Buddha's teachings.